What's going on, Sunbelt fans? My name is Dominic Rossetto. Welcome into the Round Ball Roundup for Week 9, or maybe better known as the full wrap-up for Week 2 of conference action. We'll take a look first by looking at the games that we kind of had starred going into last week, which really only two that I thought were big important games leading into the week, which were Southern Miss going up against Louisiana, and Southern Miss once again going up against ULM. In the first game, Southern Miss going to Louisiana, Jordan Brown was held in check by Southern Miss defense. Didn't shoot great either, but Kentrell Garnett and Themis Folks both put up their best point totals of the year, and they outpaced DeAndre Pinckney and Austin Crowley. Crowley came out on Twitter and let everybody know that his name is not pronounced Crowley, it's Crowley. So my apologies on the mispronunciation previously, but obviously we will now go with Austin Crowley for the rest of the season. And then Philippe Hasse actually didn't shoot all that great in that game either. Actually had two games really where he didn't have great games, which he's been shooting pretty well so far this early part of the season, but also happened to not play all that great in that second game against ULM either. But Southern Miss was able to rebound successfully. They did go down to Louisiana. I don't think I even covered that, but they went down to Louisiana 75-61. They rebound nicely with a win over a previously undefeated ULM and take them out 65-60. Crowley and Pinckney once again lead the way. Blackman and LaCour played very well for ULM, but they had a short bench, only had two guys coming off the bench, and they didn't contribute, so that really hurt them. And I dug back a little bit into the season, and if ULM doesn't get some decent production out of their bench, that's when they struggle to win some games, and that's what's hurt them against some of these other opponents. They may have had a better chance on had they had a little bit more from the bench. So what we're learning with ULM is maybe that they're not the deepest of teams, so it's going to really be important that those top players continue to play well, but they also need some contributions from other people on the roster there, especially those guys that aren't getting as many minutes. They still need to contribute when they are on the court. As far as some other close scores, we had App State getting their first conference victory, 63-62 over Coastal Carolina there in Boone. Gregory and Boykin really led the way there for that App State game and let them take down Coastal Carolina. And then we had one of the biggest surprises to me all season. For those of you who have been watching on the social media pages, I predicted this one to go pretty easily in James Madison's favor as they took on Texas State, who was previously 0-2 in conference, while James Madison was 2-0. One of the best offenses against one of the offenses that really isn't clicking. Now, Texas State's defense is pretty good, and we'll touch on that in a little bit, but pretty surprised by this one. Ophram for JMU had a pretty good game, but it was interesting. Mason Harrell wasn't even really the best player for Texas State that night, but Texas State just had a very, very well-rounded game. Everybody really contributed well and came away with a really shocking victory there up there in Harrisonburg against James Madison. So congrats to Texas State, really getting on the board with not only just a win, but a win against a team that not a lot of people, maybe not anybody, really saw coming as far as that is concerned. We also had Troy take down ODU 78-71. We know ODU has been in some really close battles. Scott Grayson has been great for them, led them with 31 points, but it was not enough to get by that Troy team with Phillips doing a really good job playing with 17 points, 6 rebounds overall. So ODU finally has a game that doesn't get decided by like 4 points or less. So great game by Troy, honestly. Just got it done against an ODU team that is always scrapping and clawing to get the victory. And then in a game that maybe sounds a little closer than it really was if you watched it, Georgia Southern continues their streak and goes 3-0 in the conference after beating Marshall 81-76. Again, score sounds a little bit closer than it really was when you watch the game, but Georgia Southern jumps out to a 48-36 lead at the half. Marshall has the bigger second half, but that big lead to get to halftime, Finch really being a massive part of that. Taylor and Kinsey obviously trying to lead the way as well as hand logged in to come back from Marshall, but it wasn't enough. Georgia Southern outplayed them in that one to get the victory. And then that covers all of the Thursday games. We'll jump into the Saturday games. Again, just some ones that were a little surprising. App State continues their good week, getting 2 wins and beats James Madison. And again, James Madison goes on the other side of what a lot of people thought. Huntley really had a really, really good game up there in Harrisonburg to lead the way for App State in that one. Again, James Madison's got to be asking themselves kind of what's going on after this one. Southern Miss, one of those games we had starred and we just spoke about. Southern Miss takes down ULM to get Southern Miss at 3-1. ULM dropping their first conference game, as we mentioned. And then we've got some close games with Texas State, again, getting another victory, 64-58 over a scrappy South Alabama team. But a South Alabama team that's probably going to be a little disappointed in what they've got as of right now. And then maybe we'll just close it out with Louisiana taking care of Georgia State. Relatively close there, 78-70. Louisiana is jumping back on the board, even though Odom had a pretty good game for Georgia State. Brown rebounded nicely from some earlier week struggles, and Louisiana gets back in the win column as far as that's concerned. As far as the standings go, we've got 4 teams sitting at 3-1. That'd be Southern Miss, Troy, Georgia Southern, ULM. So those teams looking pretty good right now. Not anything worse than a loss here or there for Georgia Southern and ULM, who were on previously pretty good 3-game win streaks. We have 6 teams, the vast majority of the conference, sitting at 2-2. That would include Marshall, James Madison, App State, Texas State, ODU, Louisiana, and that will round out those teams. The last 4 all sitting at 1-3, Georgia State, South Alabama, Arkansas State, and Coastal Carolina. What I would say for the most part is, this conference right now, I'd say really could be anybody's. I really do believe that it could still be anybody's. But as far as the championship goes, all those teams sitting at 1-3 at this time, if they take another loss, I think they might already be out. I'm going to go ahead and say that. I think they're already out at that point. It's just going to be a little bit too much to overcome. I think a loss or two, you're still sitting there pretty well. But you've already got 3 losses. You're stacking 3, 4, and 5 onto that. I don't think you're going to stand much of a chance in this conference to end up at the top. You may be able to end up in the middle. I just don't see it being a top spot for a lot of people to end up on. So as far as some statistical categories go, some league leaders, as far as scoring in the conference, now again, this is just conference scoring. This isn't with all their games included. Just the 4 conference games is what we're going to be talking about here. We've got 3 up at the top: Marshall, Louisiana, Georgia Southern, all scoring above 73 points per game. And there's pretty obvious why those 3 teams are up near the top of the conference in the standings as well when you're putting up that many points per game. As far as the bottom 3 in points, we've got Texas State, Arkansas State, South Alabama, all putting up 58 points or fewer. Now, we know Texas State is now 2-2 on the season. Well, one reason for that is if you look at the defensive categories, Texas State leads the way by only allowing their opponents to average 58 points per game. So, hey, they're struggling on the offensive side of the ball, and they're definitely going to need to change that to continue to climb the ranks in this conference. But as far as defensive side of the ball goes, they're set. I mean, they're playing really well. If you look back at their record, it's not great before they got into conference play, but they still weren't allowing a ton of points by their opponents. So defensively, they seem to be pretty solid, but they really need to step up that offensive side of the ball in order to do that. And we've really only got one team to talk about defensively that's struggling quite a bit, and that's Coastal Carolina. They're the only team in the conference who's allowing over 70 points a game to their opponents. So they're really going to have to flip that around if they want to turn their season around. I know the fan base down there is a little upset with how basketball is going. I didn't think there was a lot of reason to panic, and there still may not be, but it is a little obvious now that we've gotten a little further into conference play why they were so upset with some of the coaching and some of the play they had seen on the court thus far. As far as teams go, is best shooting team in the conference as of right now. You would think it's a team near the top, and obviously it is. Georgia Southern is shooting the ball lights out. They're over 47% from the floor. It's easy to see why they started off so hot in the conference and why they've continued to stay there. Again, that game against Marshall was really impressive. I did not think they would take Marshall down to continue that win streak in the conference before finally dropping one, but they definitely did take care of that. And as far as three-pointers go, we've got one team really leading the way here. That's ULM. Again, it's easy to see why Georgia Southern and ULM were 3-0 conference play. Yes, they just both struggled in a little bit in their last games, but easy to see why they were at the top. ULM shooting almost 40% from three, which is, 3 percentage points better than what ODU is, who comes in at second place. So, again, these teams that are scoring points are up near the top of the conference. So it's obvious to see why they had hot starts to start the year. As far as some of the defensive things we could talk about, some rebounds. As far as defensive rebounds, Georgia Southern up at number 1, Marshall number 2. I was actually a little surprised at that statistic because of who Marshall has on their roster and how they've kind of been up nationally towards the top of defensive categories in blocks and rebounds. But Georgia Southern right now, as far as the conference goes, averaging almost 30 rebounds per game, with Marshall coming in kind of close second and James Madison trailing just behind them in third. As far as offensive rebounds go, you've got Old Dominion, you've still got Marshall there at number 2, and you've still got Georgia Southern there at number 3. So again, the only outlier there is kind of ODU, but go back to the defensive rebounds, ODU is sitting there right at number 4. So again, ultimately not surprising with some of these teams. We know ODU, we've talked about, they're a very scrappy team, a very hard-working team. They've got some of those games that are just real close that just haven't quite gone their way. I think some of those games could change going into the future if they continue to remain just a scrappy bunch that people do not like to play against. As far as some individuals, Tyreek Grayson Scott from ODU is actually leading the conference. Technically, he's tied with Austin Crowley from Southern Miss. They've both averaged 20.5 points per game. Right behind them in number 3 spot is Tavion Kinsey from Marshall. Just behind them, really, at 20.3. So we've got some guys who can definitely get to the rack, and these 3 are the top scorers in the conference at this point. So mostly shooting the ball pretty well. A couple of them had some struggles in games, but the top 3 scorers as of right now. As far as rebounding goes, Omar El-Sheikh from Arkansas State, followed closely by Mika Handlogden, and then Kevin Samuel at number 3. Little surprising with how Arkansas State has struggled that they've got a guy who's so good on the boards that they can't get that turned into some more points for them. But El-Sheikh's averaging 12.5 rebounds per game. Handlogden coming in right at number 2 with 12 per game, and then Kevin Samuel at 10.5. So again, some of these guys are rebounding the ball pretty well. Unfortunately, aren't taking it to the rack quite as much. Mika Handlogden is pretty good shooter, statistically speaking, because he's so close to the basket. So that's a really good thing for him to lean on. These other guys maybe step up the shooting percentage and help turn those rebounds into putback points. That would probably change a lot of the game for both Arkansas State and South Alabama, as they've struggled a little bit starting into conference play. As far as three-point shooters go, we've got Owen White at South Alabama leading the way, shooting over 55% from 3 right now. Again, there's just got to be more consistency for South Alabama to really turn this thing around. They've got a guy who can rebound the ball well. They've got a guy shooting the 3 really well. They just need it to all come together and work it is a more cohesive group in order to turn some of these losses into wins. I think they have the talent, really, from what I've seen, to do it. They just need to be more consistent on both sides of the ball for longer stretches of time. They can't have streaks of dry spells and struggles like they've had in order to continue that way for very long. As far as block shots, we've got 3 sitting up near the top: Kevin Samuel, South Alabama; Victor Bofoto, ULM; and Mika Hanlogden, Marshall, rounding out the top 3, right at or just under 3 block shots per game. Those are your bigs. You got to lean on them. We've got ULM doing a really good job with that, with Bofoto and Mika Hanlogden. South Alabama is going to need to step it up and help Kevin Samuel turn some of those block shots into some turnovers, some fast breaks, something more than what's going on out down there in South Alabama. They've got to turn this thing around if they want to have any chance to look toward the top of the conference here. And maybe they'll be able to do that. We've got some games coming up this week that could help in that regard. As far as some of the star games we're looking at Southern Miss traveling to Marshall. We're looking at Georgia Southern going up to App State as that deeper than hate rivalry moves to the hardwood. We've also got Louisiana going against ULM. Not only is that one of those regional state rivalries, but we've got 2 teams that are really hot in the conference at this point going up against each other. And then we'll round it out with another last kind of starred game of the week: Georgia Southern traveling up to Harrisonburg to face James Madison. That would be really the last game on Saturday coming up. So got some good games coming up. Keep an eye out for. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe. Please leave me a review if you feel so inclined. I've seem to be getting a lot of the same clicks, so I appreciate everyone continuing to tune in and check this out as we go. Hopefully the conference continues to do a little bit of beating up on each other, but mostly having these good teams at the top continue to stay good, so that we can have some chances at some postseason tournaments. I think this is still a 1-bid league from what the looks of it are to me, from the outside looking in right now. Maybe that could be wrong, but we'd have to have two teams really get hot and not really lose anything else in conference from here on out. And I don't know how likely that is, because it seems to be pretty consistent right now with, expect the unknown here with how some of these games have gone. So thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.